Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll now ask the catapult party to mount the podium. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Will you now join in singing the hymn, Our Help, O God, Our Help in Ages Past? Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Webster, and I should say girls and boys as well. On behalf of the Windsor and District Historical Society, I'd like to extend to you a warm welcome to today's ceremony. In Rosalie's absence, it is my pleasure once again to act as your marshal and to see the wonderful attendance in comparison to the meagre attendance the first time I took the podium over 20 years ago, when the Windsor and District Historical Society took over the organisation and running of the ceremony. If you've caught up with the news this morning, you might have heard there were 30,000 people at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, which was a great attendance. And my wife and I recently had an enjoyable week in Canberra, and you might wonder how you can spend an enjoyable week in Canberra considering what's afoot down there at the moment. But one of the traditions that continue down there is a evening ceremony at 5 o'clock at the War Memorial around the reflecting pool, where there was a wreath-laying ceremony and the last post and reveille played. So I'd commend that to you if you are visiting Canberra. It's a lovely short ceremony which is very, very moving. Now, today I'm a bit rusty in doing these things, so I'll now go on to introduce Uncle Joe Kirk of the Turrbal, a Turrbal elder who will now welcome us to this place on Turrbal land. Uncle Joe's welcome will be followed by Charlie Chambers playing the didgeridoo, and I spoke to Charlie before. He was tuning it up and it sounds very, very good. So, Uncle Joe, would you now take the podium? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's a great day to celebrate our Anzacs. I'd like to thank the Windsor District Historical Society for inviting me again this year to welcome you on behalf of the traditional owners of Brisbane. I first of all would like to acknowledge our elders, both past and present and emerging here in Brisbane, for the dedication that they play and their role that they play within the Brisbane city as Aboriginal elders and remembering our Indigenous servicemen. So today is a special day. I also acknowledge all of our special guests that are under the marquee this morning for their dedication and for their service to Brisbane as well. I also, as an Aboriginal elder, feel very special when it is Anzac because of my grandfather, Frank Fisher, who was in the 11th Battalion, who fought overseas and was a gallant horseman. And I like to share with you, like I do every year, because to me, Anzac is every day as an Aboriginal elder. There are 3 days that we celebrate as Australians here in our country. Number 1, we celebrate Australia Day. We also celebrate Australia Day. That is very important. We also celebrate New Year's Day as Australians. Those 3 important days brings us together, as we as Aboriginals would say, we are one mob. We are proudly Australians. But today we come together for our servicemen and women and for our Vietnam servicemen. We never forget. So our story goes as Australians that when those servicemen were fighting overseas in foreign lands for us to have our freedom, their girlfriends and their fiancés and their wives were having babies within the hospitals. So the health staff decided, in memory of their servicemen, gave them a plant in memory to take home of their servicemen. So they took them plants at home and they grew over the years. And so now, as an Aboriginal elder, as I walk through any town within Australia or Queensland, I see those plants are growing and a nice big tree. And I see the servicemen in those trees. I see my grandfather. And I only just can look a little way down the road here and across the road, and I see those trees. If you don't know, those trees were the jacaranda trees. So we celebrate a special time this morning. Those jacaranda trees are also for our students that are, because of our Anzac, are getting a good education within the education system. They know that when the flowers come on those trees, it's exam time. They need to sit down and study. But to me, as an Aboriginal elder, it represents my grandfather and all those servicemen and women and our Vietnam soldiers. So it was great to stand here and be proud as an Aboriginal elder for 5,200 Aboriginal servicemen that went with non-servicemen to fight for freedom. Although when I was a young boy, I never had freedom. I was raised on an Aboriginal community called Cherbourg under the law of the government. I had no freedom. I was told what to do. And I remember the dormitory girls in Cherbourg, 200 who was in the dormitory, had that fence with a barbed wire fence around them they didn't have freedom that their servicemen were fighting for. But as you know, in 1967 and 68, we were no longer counted with the cows and the sheep and the other farm animals. As Indigenous people, we were counted in the census as citizens of Australia because of all of our servicemen, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. So we're a proud people. We've been around for over 60,000 years. And as we come together today to remember our servicemen, lest we forget, I say to you on behalf of the traditional owners of Brisbane, my ancestors, the Turrbal people, I welcome you, and I say, Ya Mamuli, Burinji Ja Wi Muya Ja Guya Ja Muya Gayi, which means, hello, welcome to this spiritual hill that represents our people, no matter what creed, what colour. Thank you again to the Society for having me represent the Indigenous people of Australia and of Queensland. I am proud to stand here on behalf of all of our diggers that we remember lest we forget. Thank you very much.
I'll now ask Councillor Andrew Wines to come and give us an address. Councillor Wines is from the inaugural ward, which borders here. We're sort of on the halfway between the border of council wards, I think. So maybe it's his turn today.
Thank you, Alan. Can I begin by acknowledging you, Alan, and the work of the Windsor and District Historical Society to make today happen. Can I recognise Uncle Joe, and in particular Tim Nichols, the state member for this area. Right, I have made some notes for this morning. We mark with a stone things that we intend to commemorate and that we expect to stand the test of time. This stone marker, this grand stone structure behind us, set high on a hill, was made by our forebears as a marker to recognise that in a place of relative means by Australian standards of the time, our best materials and skills will build this behind me as a structure, as a testimony to sacrifice and commitment of this community to defending our way of life. And we come here today with gratitude to those who this structure and place honours so that we may live in peace and prosperity. While these structures and plinths recognise particular service, Brisbane has always been a garrison town, with many markers recognising the defence community. The city's namesake, Thomas Brisbane, was a major general who led forces with the Duke of Wellington in the Iberian Peninsula conflicts in the Napoleonic Wars. The city's coat of arms holds two symbols indicating that we are a garrison town. One of them is a leopard's head indicating the presence of defence forces, and the other are two palm fronds which indicate that this is a place of victory. The army base at Enoggera began in 1908 and was the location of training and preparation for many units engaged in conflicts from then until today. And the suburb we know as Gaythorne was originally known as Rifle Range because that's where the rifle range was, at the barracks. Brisbane itself headquartered the Allied efforts during the Pacific conflict of World War II. The offices of Douglas MacArthur remain in Edward Street, and during World War II the population of Brisbane doubled due to the number of servicemen stationed here. Many of those servicemen and women were stationed in our communities. Kelvin Grove, the Bank Street area of Alderley, Enoggera itself, but in particular around Kedron Brook, around Gaythorne, and the largest populations were kept at Groverley. But also Brisbane holds a recognition of being the place where the first Anzac Day was held, where a man called the Reverend Canon Garland created the dawn service as we know it today, a system invented in Brisbane, proposed by us, and Mr Garland, or the Reverend Garland's tomb, can be seen at Toowong for those people who wish to see it. Anzac Day is a time to stop and remember the efforts of everyday Australians who volunteer to defend our way of life. And I use the term everyday not in a figurative sense, as many would, but a literal one, because both my mum and dad served 20 years as soldiers in the army. My stepmum for 10, my stepdad for 19. My sister signed up for the 1 year gap year period 12 years ago, and she's still in the army, and her partner just returned from 6 months deployment in the Middle East only 3 weeks ago. Can I assure you that I very much understand the defence community way of life and the pressure it puts on individuals and families, and the gratitude we show to the people who support our men and women in uniform should never be underestimated. As the Councillor for Inaugural Ward, I always take seriously the duty to support our families who put up with so much when people do serve overseas, and we try to do our best to give worthy service to their commitment. While much is focused on the Anzac legend, I find myself more and more focusing not on the legend of the war hero that was often placed in film and cinema, but rather the people who who serve in our forces are overwhelmingly normal people. Particularly in World War I, you would have seen the Wilston Storeman, the Newmarket tilemaker, the orderly greengrocer, the Mitchelton farmhand decided to serve their nation. You know, the sort of person that you would pass in a grocery store aisle, put on a uniform, travel to the other side of the world, and found the courage to charge enemy trenches, to face down mortar bombardments, and to witness the horrors that were World War I, the first industrial war. And as you reflect on the fact that it was an everyday Australian who volunteered to endure this, the legend, in my opinion, expands beyond the film fictional presentation to be greater, because these people were no different from the people who've collected here today, other than the fact that these people found the courage within themselves to defend our way of life overseas in very, very difficult circumstances. When courage was demanded of them, they found it, and these names marked on these columns behind us, etched in stone, are a testimony to the extraordinary courage of everyday Australians. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll now ask the Windsor State School children, or some of the children who are coming up here to make a short presentation on animals at war. Would you come forward now, girls and boys?
Throughout history, animals have accompanied men into combat as modes of transport and communication, protectors and companions. They have fulfilled a variety of roles, from carrying men and munitions to evacuating the wounded, performing guard and sentry duties, to carrying out search and rescue operations, detecting gas in trenches, to locating improvised explosive devices, IEDs, in Afghanistan. Animals have always been a crucial part of the war effort. Horses, donkeys, mules and camels carried food, water, ammunition and medical supplies to men at the front, and dogs and pigeons carried messages. Canaries were used to detect poisonous gas, and cats and dogs were trained to hunt rats in the trenches. When the First World War broke out in 1914, both sides had large cavalry forces. Horse and camel-mounted troops were used throughout the war, particularly in the desert campaigns, but on the Western Front, cavalry charges became increasingly difficult as the fighting became deadlocked and trench warfare took over. Over the course of the 20th century, the role of cavalry continued to change as combat became more mechanised. Ambulances, both horse-drawn and motorised, were part of a vast network of medical services sent to treat the wounded. Horse-drawn ambulances were used on the Western Front during the First World War.
Animals were also used to evacuate the wounded when wheeled or motorised transport was not possible, either because of rough terrain or where roads were in poor condition. In desert conditions, camels would carry the wounded and transport casualties to aid posts, dressing stations or field hospitals. One camel could usually carry 2 injured men, one on each side of its hump. During the First World War, pack animals like horses, donkeys and mules travelled over landscapes destroyed by heavy bombardments to deliver the war material needed at the front. Working individually or in teams, they would carry heavy guns and ammunition, as well as other vital supplies, especially where the use of motorised transport was impossible. This practice continued into the Second World War, when elephants were also used to carry weapons and ammunition in the Far East. Animals were not only used to carry weapons and supplies, but to transport men as well. Horses, mules, donkeys, oxen, and even elephants were used for heavy labour during the First and Second World Wars. They would be used in constructing roads and railways, or to carry heavy loads across difficult terrain that was unsuitable for motorised transport. Mules were particularly adept at navigating the rocky landscape. That was a feature of the Italian campaign during the Second World War, while in the Far East, the skill and strength of an elephant in manoeuvring large objects was particularly useful for building bridges.
Curie and Money were circus elephants in Hamburg, Germany. During the Second World War, their strength was mobilised by local authorities to clear the wreckage from resulting Allied bombing raids. Curie and Money continued to clear up bomb damage after the war ended, including wrecked vehicles. Dogs, with their keen sense of smell, could seek out soldiers and civilians in distress or in need of assistance. During the First World War, search and rescue dogs would venture out into no man's land to locate wounded men. They carried water and medical supplies to men out of the reach of ambulances and could lead stretcher parties to wounded soldiers stranded in no man's land. Dogs also performed search and rescue duties on the home front during the Second World War, helping to locate people trapped under debris following German air raids. A stray dog called Rip was adopted by the ARP, Air Raid Precautions, in Poplar, East London. Rip helped locate victims after German air raids during the Second World War. Pigeons and dogs, often able to navigate battlefields more quickly and easily than humans, were trained to carry messages. This task was especially important when technology failed or when other forms of communication were cut off. So vital were carrier pigeons that during the First World War, anyone caught killing, wounding, or abusing a pigeon could be imprisoned or fined.
War dogs attended a special training school. War dogs attended a special training school to help them become accustomed to the sights and sounds of battle, helping them stay focused on their missions even in the midst of war. Dogs, with their sense of hearing and heightened sense of smell, were particularly suited for detection duties. Guard dogs are employed to watch over important military locations, such as railways, bridges, defence installations, and ammunition stores, and give warning of any trespassers. Scouting dogs similarly alert their handlers to the presence of enemy troops, but this has to be done silently, so not to give away a patrol's position. Dogs' remarkable sense of smell has also been harnessed by the military throughout the 20th century to locate mines and concealed IEDs, improvised explosive devices.
Conditions in the trenches could lead to infestations of disease-spreading pests, particularly rats attracted by food, waste and dead bodies. Cats and dogs were sometimes trained to hunt these vermin and help maintain hygiene in the trenches. Cats were also kept on board the Royal Navy and merchant ships to hunt vermin and protect the food stores from rats, a role they have played throughout history. Animals are not only used for work. Dogs, cats, pigs and goats, as well as the more unusual monkeys, bears and lions, were kept as pets and mascots to raise morale and provide comfort amidst the hardships of war. Superstition also played a part, as mascots were thought to bring good luck to troops. Animals have always been a crucial part of every war in history, lest we forget.
On the 104th anniversary of the immortal landing at Gallipoli, this meeting of citizens of Queensland expresses its loyalty and devotion to the throne and person of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the Commonwealth of Nations. This meeting gives its assurance that those who have fallen shall be held in sacred memory, and that those who have survived the perils of war will ever be honoured and remembered with gratitude by the people whose hearts and homes they went forth to save, so that our freedom and our free institutions under the Commonwealth of Nations might survive. This meeting reaffirms its admiration of the magnificent heroism, self-sacrifice and endurance of sailors, soldiers, airmen and nursing sisters of Australia and New Zealand that will never fade. It affirms that the lofty ideals of service of the Anzacs pervade the dauntless spirit of Australia's gallant sons and daughters, who during the period of 6 years of fierce and intensive warfare on land and sea and in the air from 1939 to 1945 gave such heroic and self-sacrificing service in the causes of liberty, the same lofty ideals of service that are exemplified in the Korean, Malayan and Vietnam campaigns and numerous peacekeeping operations since that time. It voices its heartfelt sympathy for the relatives of those who have made during these conflicts the supreme sacrifice, and with those who have suffered on behalf of the Commonwealth in the cause of democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two World War memorials here, one for World War I, which is the one behind me, and the second one for the Vietnam and subsequent wars that are theatres of war. Would our federal, state and local government representatives place their wreaths first? Will Uncle Joe Kirk and others representing the community place their wreaths, please? I'd now like to introduce Major Ian Chanel from the Salvation Army Stafford, who will give us a prayer and a reading. And I'd ask you to stand and remain standing for the rest of the ceremony this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a lovely opportunity to address you this morning, this beautiful morning. As I've thought about today, my thoughts often go to my grandfather. He died during the First World War. I think he was a home guard serving in the United Kingdom. He was 40 years old, assisting a fellow comrade home one night, leaving behind 8 small children and, of course, a wife. I recognise, whilst I never knew him, I recognise that he was quite a simple man, really. Just an ordinary guy, I think. His son, my father, was 3 years old when his father died, and like him, he too served in the British Army, serving in World War II in Palestine and Egypt, Ceylon, India, and was one of the Chindits who served behind Japanese lines in Burma. And after the war, my father worked for the railways in both the United Kingdom and here in Australia, dying in peace at 74. I thought of them and the many returned servicemen and women who rarely speak of their experiences. Too horrific, I thought, too distressing, too heartbreaking, and too much blood. My father and grandfather, like so many who served, were ordinary people who possessed no special powers, no great intelligence, not that they were foolish, but no great intelligence and no affecting virtue. Ordinary people who experienced exceptional circumstances, endured unbelievable hardships, sacrificed personal comfort and safety for the sake of generations who, I guess they hoped, would never be required to endure the madness of war. Now, I suspect that the many who have served in our defence are not especially religious people. Certainly my grandfather and father were not. Though I suspect too that their experiences of war may have elicited some belief in God all the same. These heroes, our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, our uncles and brothers, our mothers, grandmothers, aunts and sisters, may not have been aware of these words from Isaiah, but they served and died that the hope expressed might come to fruition. Isaiah wrote, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house will be the highest of all, the most important place on earth. The Lord's teaching will go out from Zion. The Lord will mediate between nations and will settle international disputes. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will no longer fight against nation, nor train for war anymore. Come," he writes, "let us walk in the light of the Lord." On November 11, 1918, a new day dawned for the world. There was peace. The earthquake of artillery ceased, the explosion of bombs silenced, the plough of battleships slowed, and the roar of planes quieted. No more blood spilt in combat. Swords could indeed be beaten into tools. Men and women returned home to pick up the pieces of their lives, though many would be shattered for their lifetime. We remember them all, those who died and those who lived but suffered. We remember them that we might walk in the light of the peace they gained for us, that we might walk, as Isaiah says, in the light of the Lord. And I wondered what he meant by that. For me, it was the words of Jesus, who said, "Love one another." The writer of these words, John, continues. He says, "The greatest love a person can have for his friends is to give his life for them. And truly those we honour today lay down their lives for their friends, as well as their enemies, and those whom they would never meet." I think not only of those who died, but as I said, those who survived, and I am challenged by the sacrifice of all, the sacrifice of their personal wants and needs and comforts and securities. We may never be called to defend our nation, never required to lay down our life as they have, but the example we could follow is that of love one another, sacrificing our personal wants and needs and comforts and securities for our friends, and yes, for our enemies, and for the stranger who calls upon us. And I believe in this way we will walk in the light of the Lord. I invite you to bow your heads and join me as I pray. God of love and liberty, we bring our thanks this day for the peace and security we enjoy, which was won for us through the courage and devotion of those who gave their lives in times of war. We thank you for the brave and faithful who laid down their lives on the battlefields of war or succumbed to the perils of the deep or the air. We bless you for their dauntless courage in the cause of truth and righteousness. And we pray that their labour and sacrifice may not be in vain, but that their spirit may live on in us and in generations to come. That the liberty, truth and justice which they sought to preserve may be seen and known in all the nations upon earth. May we each express their spirit of sacrifice by giving ourselves in service to those around us who need defending, who need hope, who need freedom. And this we pray in the name of the one who gave his life for the sake of the world, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Ian. Would you now join in together and singing the hymn Abide With Me? Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a bit of a change in the program in that we will do the ode before we do the last post. So we'll continue with the ode. They shall not grow old as we are at our left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them, lest we forget. And could we have 1 minute silence now, please? you please stand for 1 minute silence? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, we now join with the students from the Windsor State School singing the National Anthem of Australia, followed by the National Anthem of New Zealand. Now the National Anthem of New Zealand. Commander, will you please march off the catafalque party, please? I'd now like to introduce member Tim Nichols. Tim is a state member for Clayfield and he will give some concluding remarks. Tim.
Well, thanks, Alan. Can I just start off by at least thanking the TS Paluma Naval Cadets for their service and for making it through the service without one need to go down on one knee. I've been at probably 8 Anzac Day parades over the last 3 days and they have done a terrific job. So I think we should at least thank them for the terrific job they have done in providing the catafalque party today. I'm not sure whether they were let off early because they thought I was going to take a long time speaking or not and they weren't willing to push their luck, but I can say to you without any fear whatsoever that these will be very short concluding remarks. As I sat there today and I listened to Uncle Joe Kirk again tell us the story of the Jacarandas, and Joe, thank you for your very warm welcome to country, and we acknowledge, of course, that the Aboriginal people have been custodians of this land for such a long time. I reflected on what a unique way it is that Australia celebrates, all of us as Australians, celebrate what has been and has become an enormously important day for our nation. Today, people gathered in their thousands, wearing board shorts, thongs and t-shirts on beaches from Currumbin all the way to Cooktown. They gathered on the banks of rivers, they've gathered in small towns, without great fanfare, without the pomp and ceremony that we might expect from the United Kingdom, or the marine displays that we might expect from the United States of America, but in a uniquely Australian way, and we have done that here today in Windsor at our memorial. And Councillor Andrew Wines spoke of the names that are etched on the stone behind us here, those who gave their lives, made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms that we enjoy today, and how they laid down their lives. When they are only a small part of the story of 106,000 Australians who have laid down their lives in conflicts since the beginning of the Commonwealth in 1901 to preserve democracy, never for conquest, but always to protect freedom and democracy. And as I listened to Joe and his story about his upbringing and his life in Cherbourg, Joe, whilst you weren't free, the people who could work to make you free were able to do so as a result of the actions of those Australians. And whilst we still have a long way to go and we may not always get it right, we all have now the freedom to be able to make change and to improve our society. We also heard from the kids at Windsor State School. Everything from rat catchers to elephants to pigeons and mules. And how uniquely Australian is that as well, to hear those stories. So thank you to the students of Windsor State School, not only for your stories which informed us and showed the value of the great education you're getting at that school, but also for your contribution to the choir. To Charlie over there, who was playing when we arrived. Charlie, thank you for coming along and providing us with some of the haunting music of your people here today. It is entirely fitting and appropriate, so thank you for that. There are, yes, please. There are many other people who have made today what it is. We have Cameron Rablin and the Salvation Army Band from Stafford who are here today, so thank you very much for providing us with the background music and certainly to cover out my doleful singing as well. So thank you, that has been much appreciated. For all those who assisted setting up today, Tim for putting the sound system together as he has done a number of occasions in the past made the somewhat unkind remark to Andrew and I early on that if the sound system failed, at least we had plenty of practice at shouting. So that hasn't been necessary, and thank you very much for putting that together. Now, for many of us, it's a day off, but for the members of the Queensland Police Service, it's not, and the members of the Queensland Fire and Emergency Service, it's not. And for their help today in making sure that we can get here safely and hopefully cross back over Lutwich Road and get something to eat in a little while, thank you very much for your time here today. You'll no doubt note that the lectern I'm standing at proudly has the name across it of the Rotary Club of Brisbane North, and we thank them for the provision of the barbecue after today's service. To all of those who have made the numerous ANZAC biscuits we're about to enjoy, thank you very much. And particularly to Rob, the committee and members of the Windsor and Districts Historical Society for making this event such a tremendous success. Alan mentioned that over 20 years ago the crowds attending Anzac Day ceremonies were much smaller than they are today. I first attended my first Anzac Day ceremony as an elected representative 20 years ago, and the crowd then at Cameron Rocks Reserves down on the banks of the Hamilton River numbered about 30, and this morning at 5 a.m. that crowd numbered about 500. Over 20 years we have seen a remarkable awareness grow throughout Australia of the importance of Anzac Day. Not of war, not of conquest, but of commemoration and of giving thanks for the service of Australian servicemen and women throughout the world. And so today is a great example of how that continued interest grows. And finally, can I please thank all of you for coming along here today. Your attendance here ensures that the story of Anzac will continue into future generations as it should.
Thank you, Tim, for those good words. I'd now ask our President of the Windsor District Historical Society, Robert Cooper, to give thanks and for your attendance and invite you to morning tea, hopefully.
Yes, thanks everyone for coming along and commemorating Anzac Day once again this year. We'd like to invite you across the road to the Windsor Council Chambers, where we've got a sausage sizzle, Anzac biscuits, tea and coffee and cordial. We'd like to invite you over there to continue with the commemoration. For a short period, the police will be blocking the road to allow as many of us as possible to cross the road without fearing any traffic situations. So just wait for the signal from the police and they'll guide you across the road. But thank you very much for coming along today, and we look forward to seeing you once again next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And that, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, concludes our service here this morning. And as Robert said, you're welcome to go over and have a cuppa and an Anzac biscuit across the road, but be careful crossing the road. Thank you very much.